Yay. So, hi, Alexis. I'm so glad that you agreed to do an interview with us. Can you tell us a bit about what you're going to present on at Reinventing Reconnecting?
Sure. Well, some of you know that we did a big collaborative workshop in October through Nolative with the gut-brain axes. And it was something very new in that we had 4 different instructors from around the world that kind of came together to present different parts of a huge topic. And when I started getting into the topic, I got really excited. It got to a point where my family basically banned me from uttering the words microbiome because I was starting to throw it into just every conversation. We're fermenting everything here now. I'm all into my soil organisms. It was getting a little bit crazy. But this is what happens when you start researching this topic is you realize how important it is. And we all know it's important, but when you start really getting into it, you start going, oh, wow, like we can tie almost anything into this idea of the microbiome and the way that this is influencing the brain. And as I was starting to work with this topic, I wanted to use a different approach than what a lot of people do with it. I wasn't really interested in getting into the anatomy and physiology and chemistry of it because I knew that other people were going to talk about that. And there's really wonderful material about that. I thought, what if we looked at this in a slightly more holistic sense? So in the kinesiology world, we base a lot of our work in Touch for Health and in like the metaphors class, for instance, on the idea of the energetic physiology behind an organ. So we understand that the liver is associated with anger, for instance, or that the heart is associated with joy. And we have all these metaphors that kind of come around with it. And I started thinking to myself, if we're talking about this as being an organ, the microbiome, because it is spread throughout the body like a far-flung organ, then we can start looking at maybe there are these other associations that we need to bring in here. There's energy that is here. There's a consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And so I started playing with this idea of what would that consciousness be? And what would that look like? And what energetic states would we see in the body when that's blocked? And what affirmations could we use to balance that out? And so I really got into kind of playing with that. So the course that I did as part of that workshop gets into a lot of the emotional and psychological aspects of the microbiome. But for this conference, I'm really just talking about that aspect of how would we maybe personify the microbiome, and then some simple balancing techniques that we could use in order to see why is there stress in that and work through it in a really easy and fluid and organic kind of way to balance out the emotional stress that's affecting the microbiota, and also the way the microbiota might be creating emotional stress for us because it's a two-way street, right? So that's kind of it in a nutshell, I think.
Oh, fantastic. So I'm going to backtrack now and I'm going to ask you, there's the moment you discover kinesiology. So what was that moment for you?
That's a messy question for me because my kinesiology history is not the average one. Some people may have heard me talk about this before in interviews or at conferences. I have a unique story in that my grandfather on my dad's side was one of the first Touch for Health instructors in Canada. And my grandmother on my mother's side worked for a chiropractor who had studied under Goodhart. And so I had 2 grandparents on opposite sides of the family that both actually just did muscle testing when I was a kid. And so I had a grandfather who, he would show me how things worked. I have very clear memories of him having me say, my name is Alexis, and that my arm would hold. And then he would say, I am a little green frog. And I would say, I'm a little green frog. And my arm would go down. And just how amazing that was as a little kid. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, she didn't have the framework of something like Touch for Health, but she had learned how to muscle test so that she could help clients and patients that came into the chiropractic office find supplements. So she was very comfortable with sort of what we might call yes, no style muscle testing. And she taught her girls. So when I was a little kid, it was very normal that if I got a cold, nobody took me to the doctor. Instead, my mother or my grandmother or my grandfather, somebody would muscle test, tell you what tea you needed, how much vitamin C to take, right? So that was sort of the way we grew up. And I didn't really realize how abnormal that was until I got older and moved away from home and suddenly had roommates, right? And realized that this is not actually the average thing. Um, Eventually, however, I found myself in a health food store, and I got a job in a health food store. And through my work there, ended up meeting somebody who was interested in iridology and started studying that. And so I started studying iridology. I ended up taking a 2-year diploma course in herbology and iridology. And then, you know how it is when you start in this field, you want to know more. So that led into courses on aromatherapy and on massage. And then eventually I moved back to British Columbia, where I'm from. And I ended up working in the same office that my mother was now working in. She had gone back into school to do like holistic spa kind of techniques. And the woman who ran that office was a Touch for Health instructor. And believe it or not, I had never taken a Touch for Health class, but she looked at me one day and went, "You should teach Touch for Health." And I was like, "I've never taken Touch for Health. I can't teach such a thing." And she went, "Well, I'm teaching a class, next month. Come in. If you don't like it by Saturday morning, like if you're not into it by lunchtime, go home and I won't even charge you." And so, okay. And as they say, the rest is history. What really got me with it, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling here, but I feel like this is the thing. People had tried to teach me to muscle test before. My mother had tried to teach me to muscle test. My grandmother had tried to teach me to muscle test. And I would test something and I would go, "Okay, well that's good. It's holding strong. But is it strong because I think it should be strong because I know about nutrition? Or is it actually strong? Or is it supposed to be strong or is it supposed to go up?" And no, now it's weak. Now I don't know what to do. And I would second guess and I would recheck and I would do all of these things. And I never had the confidence in what I was doing with it because it always seemed like my brain was overriding whatever the muscle was doing. And in that first couple hours of Touch for Health, I got those techniques that allowed me to check if I have an accurate indicator muscle and do some basic pre-checks. And I swear, as soon as I got that information, it was like all the lights came on and the angels sang because I suddenly could see how to check that I was actually doing this thing right. And then once I could see it, it was like, okay, this is it, right? Let's just do this. So you and I were talking previously about sort of the workshop model and taking different classes and how that happens. I ended up going through my Touch for Health very quickly, and then going right into basically instructor training and starting with that. And then shortly after that, classes like SIPS and NOT. And I just loved it. Once you get in, you just want more and more, and you start discovering more and more ways of working with it. But I'm very grateful that I had those two experiences in early childhood because it gave me both the framework of Touch for Health, which is so brilliant in showing you how things correlate and giving you these balances that you can use. But I also was able to see how somebody used muscle testing outside of a framework, which then I think gave me a little more open-mindedness about how you can move and integrate through modalities and how you can kind of go beyond the frames, because that's one place where I find people get stuck a little bit when I'm working with students.
Yeah, you can get stuck, can't you, when the client doesn't behave and they don't fit within the frame. It's like, oops, it's not working. They don't want that one anymore. And then you've got to, yeah. And that's, I think, where muscle monitoring is a skill that then becomes an art form. Like teaching is a skill. And then when you teach for a long time, you realize it's an art form as well. And there's a relationship and communication. So from that, how did you, well, you said the angels sang. So did they sing gems into your ear? How did gems come about?
Um, So GEMS, it's almost a joke actually, because you know how it is. We had a lot of clients come in. I'm saying we. My mother ended up coming and working with me. I started my own office, and we were co-teaching. And so we co-taught for years, Touch for Health, and it was glorious. And I'll just go on record on video of saying my mother's the best practitioner I've ever seen. So there it is. It's on record.
Sure she sees this video, Alexis.
I'll make sure she does. I could use the brownie points right now. So, um, okay, so people would come in, and your clients often end up becoming your students because you've been working on them for a while, and they want to learn how to do something, or you start going, some of these things that you're bringing your kids in for, you could be doing these things.
Yeah.
So we would end up with a lot of our clients in our classes, and we both had lots of other modalities under our belts, right? And you would get people going, well, when do you learn how to do this? Or when do you start learning this? When do you get the magic, right? And we started just saying, well, it's in Touch for Health 5. Almost as a joke, that it was like, well, this is after the Touch for Health. Like it's outside of this parameter. So that was one part of it. The other part of it was that at the time I had just started teaching SIPS classes as well. And SIPS uses Touch for Health as a prereq, but there are things that are implicit within SIPS, like other advanced kinesiology classes, that are not taught in Touch for Health. So I had the experience of going from Touch for Health instructor class, thinking I knew a lot of stuff, into a SIPS class and realizing I didn't know what this thing was that people were doing with their hands. I didn't understand the stacking. I was missing bits, right? And so these two things kind of correlated for me. It was the ability to create a system that would allow people to make use of all of the stuff they were doing in Touch for Health that, as you put it before, when the client doesn't behave. What I mean is that, like, when you get clients come in, nobody ever comes into your office and goes, I feel a little bit emotionally unstable. I could really use a sound balance to kind of bring that into, right? Nobody asks for those things. We have to have our own systems in place that allow us to look at all these tools that we've been given and go, this is what we need right now. So it was a lot about allowing people to see all their tools, move through them in a really beautiful and easy and fluid kind of way that makes sense in a session. And then also being able to give practitioners and students the tools that would bridge those classes so that they could easily move from Touch for Health into another class without feeling like they were missing stuff in between.
It synthesizes.
Yeah, it does. It allows you to really easily integrate things. And this is the way that my brain organizes stuff from all of the different classes that I work with. This is kind of the framework that makes sense to me. So it was really just about sharing my framework with people. And once I started doing that, I found that people were really happy to have something that seemed easy and simple. And I guess the last part of that I kind of forgot about before, I don't know how it is so much in Australia. In Canada, one of the things that I was finding was that people tended to take Touch for Health as an intro class, as a foundational class. And then once they took other courses, they would sort of forget about that stuff. It's like, well, that was the beginner stuff and we don't use that anymore. We now do this fancy thing over here. But the truth is that those beginner things, because they're so simple, like they work, right? I know there are times when I spend a huge amount of time putting lots of information into a circuit and working with lots of different SIPS points and bringing in lots of other information. And I go to look for a correction and it's something as simple as like holding ESR points. So we don't want to shove those things aside just because we have other information. And I found that when we started using the GEMS flow chart on the scan sheets, it elevated people's Touch for Health. Like it reminded people about how great some of those techniques that they had put away and not used because it took too long or they didn't know when to use them or whatever. it kind of brought it back into the practitioner book. And that's a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from people, is that suddenly things that they never used to do come up in session, and now they understand them a lot better. And it's brought some of that shine back to their first kinesiology love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That is a unique story for how you ended up in kinesiology. Most people I speak to, it's their child was sick, or
Yes.
they weren't well, and or they went to everybody, and they end up at the wadiologist.
Yes.
But now more and more people know about it, because when I started it, no one even knew about it. It was just a miracle I found it. So yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I could talk all night about this. Um, well, I mean, just piggybacking on what you just said there, um, we have seen a difference in the last 10 years or so, haven't we? About how much recognition this field is getting. And I feel like we're actually quite blessed that we get to be part of it at this time when we are really starting to see like big growth, and we're starting to see more recognition. People understand what it is. I mean, even a few years ago, when I would tell people I'm a specialized kinesiologist, they would go, "Oh, what now?" Right? And now, more often, I'm starting to get people go, "Okay, I've heard of that." And I go, "Really?" And, um, but they know someone who saw someone who did something that was amazing.
Yeah.
And as you and I were discussing previously, it grows exponentially in that it's not always the people I talk to that then become my clients or students. I talk to someone who talks to someone else who goes and sees someone in a different part of the world. But we all get to be part of this wave of information right now, which is really quite glorious. And as much as this last year has been a little bit crazy in terms of world events, let's just say, without getting too political about anything, it has been interesting to see our kinesiology community come together online in unique ways, and to suddenly have new opportunities that weren't there before.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, if I was going to join in with your conference, I would have had to fly all the way to Australia. And this year I get to do it from here and still get to meet you this way and to work together with everyone there. So how fantastic is that?
It is. Um, I like the way you said a wave of information, because I think that's what kinesiology is. Like I look at my essences and think of them as frequency information. And I'm excited that there's more and more confidence in it, and more awareness that yes, it works. And I might know exactly all the ins and outs of how it works, but I can feel it as an individual client in my body, and I get excited. So then I tell other people, and that's growing, I'm sure, everybody's businesses. Were you already doing online balances before this world event? And what's your opinion on them? Because that's been interesting to see clients who didn't want to do anything online because of the circumstances, they were willing to give it a go, and then they were surprised. Well, I found they're surprised how much it works. And I wondered, what are your thoughts on online balances?
I do a lot of distance sessions, and I was before this, partly just because, as maybe not everyone knows, 5 years ago my family picked up from Western Canada and moved to Costa Rica. So I live in the middle of nowhere. I'm at the end of a dirt road. There is jungle outside. Um, and so when I moved here, I had clients that I had been seeing for 10 years who were a little bit upset about the whole thing. And some of them I ended up just continuing to work with from here. And I had done distance sessions previously, when working, even just in Canada with people when they were not able to come into the office for some reason. I believed that it worked already, but I definitely do more of it now. Um, and partly when I'm doing sessions like that, it's because I have like students and it's mostly students and other practitioners around the world from when I've taught in different places that I'm continuing to work with. I definitely think it works. Uh, and it's quite wonderful because I've been kind of compiling some anecdotal and empirical evidence to support that as we kind of work through it. Um, for instance, I had a client in Canada that I was working with, somebody who I'd been working with for years. She's very energetically sensitive, and she is a practitioner. And when I do my sessions, she would always have a really strong kind of reaction when I would do the points that would help to release the stress, like what we would do in SIPs with the amperage and resistance points. So in my sessions, I tend to pile a lot of stress in and then release the stress, and then pile it in and release, and then do corrections at the end. And she needed some convincing that it was going to work long distance. And so we did a session shortly after I moved here where I was working on her as if she was here in front of me. And every time I did one of the downloads, the amperage and resistance, I just noted the time. And I had her noting the time when she was having her sort of reactions and feelings from it. And then we compared the notes afterwards. And we found that she was very consistently feeling the peaks of when the energy was being released from the body. And that gave both of us some confidence, right? I've had clients where I do some physical work on them. Maybe we're doing a little bit of work resetting valves, or we're doing work with resetting the femoral head and the IT band, or an NOT correction, something physical, right? And there's somebody who I've worked with in person before, and they'll say, I know how it feels when you do that thing. You know, that thing when you roll my IT band or whatever it is. And I could feel it when you did it. And so again, that gives me confidence in what we're doing with it. But you know, I think we're going to find more and more. I mean, the more that we start to learn about quantum entanglement, we understand that time and space don't really exist when we start working with this level of energy, right? Um, messages travel faster than the speed of light. Messages just happen when there's been a connection in some way. And I mean, we could get into that for hours. What was that?
Maybe that'll have to be another interview.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating.
But definitely I'm finding that it's helping a lot. I was working with another practitioner Monday, who's in the States. And this is somebody who had some physical therapy exercises that she was supposed to be doing to fix an injury that were causing a lot of pain. And she was having trouble figuring out, you know, how to balance herself out so that she could do the exercises that she needed to do in order to strengthen the area. So we did a Zoom call like this. She did the exercises. I was continuous recording while she was doing it. We then went in, found all the areas of stress, did corrections back and forth with the video like this, redid the exercise, and you can see the difference. So I think if people don't feel really confident with it, it's maybe just because they need to have the practice with somebody who can give them really good feedback.
Yeah.
Somebody who they know can tell them when they feel something, or do it with Zoom where you can see something change.
Yeah.
And hopefully that then gives them that feeling like, okay, I can do this. And then they can move forward from there.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Oh, what a great, it's really nice to chat to you. And I'm so glad you could come on in your evening and my morning. We could work it out. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, I'm just